am originally a priest of the Archdiocese of Chicago. And my first pastor was Miles Patrick McDonald. And he had one rule: never run out of hosts. So somewhere in All Saints Cemetery in Chicago, Miles is wagging his finger at me. This evening, I'm very, very pleased and happy to be with you and to talk a little bit about the conclave that recently elected Pope Leo. I was scheduled to be here in January, and Pope Leo called all of the cardinals of the world together for a consistory. Now, what is a consistory? It's a consultative body that the Pope can call, and he can fashion it any way he wants. Obviously, he's the Pope. But the consistory that Pope Leo invited the cardinals to weigh in on was a way that he wanted us to help him focus on his ministry as pontiff and to raise questions and suggestions that he could use and would prove helpful. I hope we satisfied his desire. But that consistory in January coincided with the time that the Chris had invited me to come here. So I'm sorry, Harry, you were bumped by the Pope. But I was very, very happy to reschedule with Father Steve and with the Chris family to make this a return visit. Now, the consistories that ordinarily take place are consultative, of course, but in certain consistories, the Pope then chooses that opportunity to announce and to create new cardinals. Pope Pius XII, some of you may remember him, not personally, but the name. He was elected in March of 1939, right at the beginning of the Second World War. He was elected in that conclave that included 62 cardinals. Of the 62, only 25 were non-Italians. So it was clearly a situation that was reflective of that age, where the College of Cardinals were largely, certainly from the Italian community, but also from the European community. Pope Pius XII held only 2 conclaves in his entire pontificate of 18 years. One in 46, after the war, because then he could invite the cardinals that he was creating to come to Rome. Before then, travel, like travel today, would be, very difficult. He held another one in 53. The conclave that elected Pope John Paul II, Pope John Paul XXIII in 1958 had only 52 cardinals. And again, the proportion was weighted heavily for the Italians. But then that began to change. The popes began to expand the representation of the College of Cardinals. Pope St. John XXIII named the first African cardinal, Cardinal Rugamba. And then the numbers began to grow. Pope Paul VI called the conclave, and he put a cap on the conclave of 70, reflective of the Old Testament. There were 70 elders. Pope John Paul II decided, I ain't doing that anymore. So he then began to name cardinals from all over the world in a much more sweeping categories. He also was the first pope to travel as widely as he did. Some of you will recall, Paul VI was the first pope to visit the United States. But he also went to Africa, he went to the Holy Land. And so what I'm describing that to let you know that the College of Cardinals and the Pope's desires to broaden the categories of those who would serve the church as cardinals kept expanding. Then we have John Paul II. I'm surprised that he was ever in Rome. He was always on the road. He made many, 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 many different trips because he wanted to make sure that he got a chance to visit the people in the church and to be a part of their lives in their local context. So you probably have seen pictures of Pope John Paul II visiting places and wearing get-ups that people gave him. You know, he had feathered hats and, you know, he wanted to identify and make sure that the church was represented in all of the lands that comprise the body of Christ. He also named literally dozens of cardinals. Now, Pope Francis, in the 13 years that he served, well, John Paul I don't want to pass over him too quickly. He was a pope only 1 month. Remember that? Yeah. So he had he didn't have a chance to name any cardinals. Pope Francis expanded the College of Cardinals, naming cardinals from places in the earth that had never had a cardinal. There's a cardinal in Mongolia. There's cardinals in almost all of the Asian, African countries. And so when he died, the College of Cardinals gathered in Rome those who were voters, and you can vote up until the age of 80. You lose the vote when you turn 80. Now, as a Chicagoan, to lose the vote, to lose the vote as a Chicagoan is a personal affront, you know. But the College of Cardinals gathered in April and May, and we did it with, I think, a great sense of exploring the nature of the church. I began by talking about the election of Pope Pius XII and the 62 cardinals. By and large, they all knew each other. Some were closer friends than others, but because it was such a heavily European-based community, most of them had at some point rubbed elbows with other of the cardinals. The conclave that took place this past May brought together many cardinals who had never met each other. But in preparation for the actual conclave, there were what's always there. They're called congresses. And that is when all of the cardinals, whether you are under 80 or over 80, can participate. And what took place in those congresses is that the cardinals spoke about the church that they served. What does the church in Asia need? What does the church in Africa need? What does the church in Central and Latin America need? What does the church in North America need? What does the church in the Pacific Rim need? And there was great dialogue to explore what was going on in churches that were under persecution, churches that were facing political upheaval, churches that were richly blessed, like our own particular church. Now, I grew up in Chicago, I've already said that, and so I grew up on the South Side in a little neighborhood called Englewood, which is now desperately poor and very, very violent in many respects. But I brought that to the conclave too. It was not that way when I was a kid. It was a hard-working community of people, a lower social economic community, working class folks, not in any way with the level of violence that currently besieges that community. But I brought all of that with me into the conclave, listening to what the other cardinals had to say, and then by sheer coincidence, I was sitting in the Sistine Chapel, and everything is done by seniority. So the cardinal bishops, that's a title that some of them have because of their position, seniority, cardinal priests, of which I am one, and cardinal deacons. Usually the cardinal deacons are the cardinals that work in Rome and are part of the Pope's cabinet. But it's all, the seating in the Sistine was all done by seniority. And just by sheer coincidence, he was a cardinal bishop. Robert Prevost was right across the aisle from me. It was just by seniority. Now, he also is a Chicagoan. And no, I didn't vote twice for him. But one of the things that I find just amazing is that now I'm older than the Pope. I never thought I would say that. I'm 8 years older than the Pope. But he also comes from, obviously, another religious community. We've had a Jesuit and now an Augustinian. And they bring with them the heritage of their formation, their spiritual life, how they were formed, Pope Francis, Pope Leo, how they were formed as they were preparing to become priests. Pope Leo was a missionary. I think I'm telling you things you probably already know. He spent 30 years in Peru. And so his preparation for the papacy was heavily influenced by his missionary background. He was also the provincial twice of the Augustinians. And as provincial, he went around the world visiting the Augustinian communities wherever they were located. So he traveled, he was a missionary, and he's just a wonderful human being, very easy to talk to. One of the things that I was able to do was to meet with him after the election. One of the things, once he's elected, once he's got the number of votes, and once he accepts, the cardinal presiding at the conclave goes to the one who has received the votes, and he says, "Do you accept your canonical election as Supreme Pontiff?" And once he says yes, he is the Pope. It's an automatic, an automatic acceptance and bestowal of the office. Then he goes in what's right off the Sistine Chapel. There's a room that's called the Room of Tears, because he takes off all of the red and he puts on the white cassock and puts on the white zucchetto, and he comes back and he receives the homage, the congratulation of the other cardinals. Well, because I had some knowledge of him, I can't say we were, best buddies, but we knew each other. When I came to him This is what I said. From one Southsider to another, I promise you my respect, my obedience, and my love. And he was happy. So that's how it happens. Now, I told Father Stephen, I think I mentioned it to Harry, these presentations are what I think I want to talk about, but they may not be what you want to hear. So I'm going to open myself up. I can't tell you the secrets of the conclave, who got which vote and all that. That's under the pontifical secret. But if I can answer your questions, I'll be more than willing to do so. Yes, sir.
Are you able to say, do you have an opinion of the direction of change that we might expect in the church? I myself, because he was a missionary for all those years, believe that the emphasis will be on apostolic action. But do you have some perspective on where we're going?
I think you're right. I think his missionary heritage is going to be a heavy influence on his ministry. But I also think that, and he said this in so many words already within this first year, he wants to build up the unity of the church. Folks, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. We live in a very divided country and a divided church. And he has said he wants to bring the community of faith in a closer union with each other and overcome some of the pettiness that divides us. So missionary focus and unification. That's my humble opinion of how he's going to move. Yes?
Do you know historically part of us represented to be the Pope and
You know, I really don't know. I know that in the past, there were certain concordats, that is, agreements, civil national agreements that gave certain royal families influence, and there was a situation where, and this is, I don't know which conclave, I think it would have been the one that would have elected Pius X, but don't hold me to that, where one of the European heads of state exercised what was a concordat to say that he would not want Cardinal A to be elected. And so, and that's why when Pius X, one of the first things he did was undo all of those, that you cannot influence the election of a pope or rule some cardinal out. But I don't know if anybody has refused it, because that would be under the pontifical secret.
he's between line classes.
Today. Well, he's back. He's home by now. You know, I'm not positive, but I think Monaco hasn't had a papal visit in 450 years. So he thought, well, it's about time, you know. But it might also be his gesture to support Catholic royalty. They're not perfect, but he would be gesturing to the royal family to cling to your faith. It's a small, obviously a very small, second in size only to the Vatican.
Question. You want to speak to the Pope. You text them, you call them. Not me, you.
I have his private cell, and he has mine. That's one of the things he did at the consistory. You had to sign up and give your cell, which then goes through the Secretariat of State. So if I were to call him, he would know Wilton is calling. And if he called me, I'd answer. But he set that up. He wants to have a closer union with the College of Cardinals. And I think that's one of the reasons why the consistories that he has established brings us all together. He wants us to work more collaboratively together. He's a religious, remember? And that's one of the characteristics of religious life. You have these gatherings to elect a provincial, and then the provincial has a consultative body. And so I think that would be one of the things he would want to do.
And once you're a cardinal for life.
Right, but you lose the vote at 80. You can still get dressed up, but you lose the vote at 80. Yes.
I'm just curious about his personal family. How would they address him after he becomes Pope?
Bob. He's got two brothers. And that's not uncommon. I don't know if you ever read when Angelo Roncalli was elected John the 23rd. He came from this very poor farming family in Italy, and one of the things that happened once he was elected, I think it was his sister said, "Oh, not Angelo," you know. But you know, you don't lose your identity. You're still a member of the family. When I was named in the conclave of 2020, there were 13 of us. I was the only American. And the conclave took place the Saturday after Thanksgiving. So Francis invited me to have lunch with him, just the two of us, on Thanksgiving Day. And we talked about, family. I have two sisters. He was the oldest of five. He still had one sister that was still living. So I said, Holy Father, and don't forget, he's an Italian immigrant family that had moved to Argentina. So I said, Holy Father, when your sister, the other remaining family member, sibling, when she comes to Italy, does she come to visit you? He said, no, she goes up and visits the other relatives up there. So I told him, he asked me, he says, do you have sisters? Or do you have siblings? I said, yes, I have two sisters. I'm the oldest of three. And I said it broke their heart because my consistory happened in the height of COVID. I had only 10 guests. In all of the 13, each had 10 guests. So I chose the 10 young men that were at the North American College from Washington because they were already there, So he said, do you have siblings? I said, I have two sisters. And I said it broke their heart that their brother was being named a cardinal, they couldn't go. And I said, but once they found out they couldn't go shopping, it was all okay. But so you don't lose your family ties. Benedict had a brother who was also a priest, and for his birthday or anniversary, the brother would come down from Germany, and there are pictures of him having a big old stein of beer, I say those things because I think it's important for us to realize that the pontiffs come from families. They have a life. They don't lose that. and they shouldn't. It grounds them, I think.
Do you see any particular impact the first American Pope on the American Church?
I think I do. Stepping aside from the Chicago, he's seeing pictures of him. He's a big White Sox fan and all of those things. But more than anything, I think he's in a position to challenge us, to say, you have all of these gifts. The Lord has so richly blessed our country. You must be generous in sharing what the Lord has given to you. You must be faithful. And I think that's an important contribution that he can, and I think he is making. I had the great privilege of, after the conclave, I witnessed the marriage of two couples in Washington that I had gotten to know. And the bride in one of them was a girl from Atlanta that I had confirmed when I was the Archbishop of Atlanta. So she met this wonderful young man in Washington, and he asked if I would witness their marriage. So I did. But then I wrote, and they wanted to go to Rome. He's Italian in his heritage, and he had never been to Italy. So for their honeymoon, they went to Italy, and they were going to Rome, and they asked if I could help them see the Pope. Well, the Pope does see newly wedded couples. You've seen pictures of the brides often wear their wedding gown. The guys don't have to wear their tux or anything like that. So they did. They went over, and they had they were one of maybe 15 or 20 couples, newly married couples. And when he shook hands, he said, "Cardinal Gregory married us." And I don't know what he said, but perhaps he was saying, "I'm glad he's still working," Okay.
Given the enormous popularity of Pope John Paul II, have you, as the Pontiff appointed for the Cardinal's Pope, recently?
No. A couple of things. The popes, once they broke out of the Italians had the ball for like 400 plus years. As a matter of fact, I hope I can say this without saying the wrong thing. When John Paul II was elected, I was still a doctoral student in Rome. So the announcement comes, we have a Pope, Cardinal Wojtyła. I knew who he was, but what I didn't know was the Italian word for Krakow, Cracovia. It was not a word that I used that often, So I'm standing under St. Peter's, literally about the distance between here and the balcony, and the announcement comes, Cardinal Wojtyła, and I'm standing next to this wonderful little Italian lady, I don't know her name. I said, "Lui non italiano." She said, "Impossibile." I said, no, lui non italiano, lui un polacco. And she, impossibile. I said, "Lui arcivescovo di Krakow." But I'm using the English word for Krakow, not Cracovia. Finally, after about 3 times of saying that he's the Archbishop of Krakow, she says, "Ma dimmi questo, padre. Lui è nero? Is he black?" Because she thought that I was using the name of one of the black cardinals, one of the... I said, no. Well, that was okay, because once the Italians dropped the ball, it didn't matter who recovered. Yeah. Okay. Others? Yes.
I want to interject that our recent married wife is
to school. Hopefully it'll, I think, talk about his humbleness he referred to when you first talked to him. He still referred to himself as well.
Yes.
He showed a humbleness.
And a rootedness. You know, when I became a bishop, now the cardinal, I'm still my sister's brother. I call them every Sunday. One lives in California, one lives in, we have a phone conversation every Sunday. I'm their brother. And they still tell me things that only a sister can tell a brother. And I won't repeat them, we're still in church, you know.
Well, it's fair then, because the time I've spent with you, I've seen the same humbleness.
Well,
And thank you for being here today. I know Harry has been trying to get you here for years. This is not a bad gig. We think we could meet you back sometime.
only in the winter. Thank you. Thank you. Am I off the hot seat?